The Bread and the 400, a story of compassion in the desert, El Paso, Texas, 1894. The lonely king of Texas, the sun was dying slowly over the Texas plains, painting the endless dust in shades of copper and gold. John Mallory sat alone on the wide porch of his ranch house, a fortress of wood and stone that rose from the desert like a monument to one man's will. At 45, John had built an empire from nothing. His father had died when he was 12, leaving him with 20 scrawny cattle and a patch of dirt that other ranchers laughed at. Now, 33 years later, John owned more land than some European kingdoms. His cattle numbered in the tens of thousands. His bank accounts could buy half of El Paso. But tonight, like every night for the past 5 years since Margaret died, he ate his simple meal alone. Fresh bread, still warm from the kitchen. Beans seasoned with chilies. A thick cut of beef from his own herds. You know what they say about you in town? Miguel, his foreman, spoke from where he leaned against the porch railing. Miguel had been with John for 20 years, the only man who dared speak to him as a friend rather than an employer. They say John Mallory is the richest man in 3 counties, but the loneliest soul in all of Texas. John tore a piece of bread, not meeting Miguel's eyes. Let them talk. A man needs more than money, Patron. A man needs peace. John's voice carried the weight of old wounds. Margaret's face flickered in his memory, pale against the white sheets, her hand growing cold in his. And he stopped. There, at the edge of his vision, something moved. A child stood at the ranch gate, 100 yards from the house. Even at this distance, John could see she was small, maybe 9 years old. Her dress hung in tatters. It might have been blue once, but was now the color of dust and despair. No shoes on her feet. The desert had painted her with its dust until she seemed made of the earth itself. She didn't call out, didn't wave. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed on the bread in John's hands. Miguel straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol at his hip. Another beggar. They come from that migrant camp down by the river. Mexicans waiting for work on the railroad. I'll send her away. No. The word came out harder than John intended. He stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The bread was still warm in his hands. Boss, if you start feeding them, they'll never stop coming. You know how these people are. But John was already walking. His boots raised small ghosts of dust with each step. The girl didn't move, didn't retreat. She watched him approach with eyes that had seen too much for her years. Up close, John could see the map of her journey written on her small body. Scratches from mesquite thorns made red lines on her brown arms. Sunburn peeling on her cheeks. The particular gauntness that comes not from missing one meal, but many. Her hair, black as midnight, was matted with dust and sweat. He knelt, bringing himself to her height. Extended half the loaf. No words passed between them. Words weren't needed. The girl's hand, impossibly small and trembling slightly, reached out and took the bread. For one moment, their eyes met, and John saw something he recognized, the fierce pride of someone who hates needing help but needs it all the same. The same look he'd had at 12, standing over his father's grave, refusing to cry in front of the other ranchers. The girl nodded once, a gesture so adult it made John's chest tight. Then she turned and ran back toward the desert, her bare feet making no sound on the hard-packed earth. She clutched the bread against her chest like treasure. She'll be back tomorrow, Miguel said when John returned to the porch. Mark my words. Tomorrow she'll bring others. Give them an inch. John settled back into his chair, but his appetite was gone. Then I'll need more bread. You're too soft, boss. Your father would have. My father died poor and angry. John cut him off. I'll do things my way. Fire and ashes, but the girl didn't come the next day. Or the day after. John found himself watching the gate during his evening meals, waiting for that small figure to appear. He'd even asked the cook to bake extra bread. It sat on the table beside him, growing cold, uneaten. On the third day, smoke rose black against the morning sky from the direction of the river. John was inspecting the eastern pastures when he saw it, a column of smoke so dark it seemed to swallow the sun. His horse, Caesar, snorted nervously. Fire at the migrant camp, said Tom Rodriguez, one of his cowboys, riding up fast. Started before dawn. The whole place is gone. By noon, fuller word had reached the ranch. The migrant camp, a collection of tents and makeshift shelters where Mexican families waited for their men to return from railroad work, had burned to nothing. No one knew how it started. Cooking fire, maybe. Or worse, There were plenty in town who resented the Mexicans, who saw them as threats to American jobs. The families there, mostly women and children, had scattered into the desert with whatever they could carry. Good riddance, said Wilson, the banker, who had come to discuss a land purchase. Those camps are eyesores. Brings disease and crime. You're better off without them so close to your property, Mallory. John's fist clenched, but he kept his voice level. Those are families, Wilson. Children. Mexican children, Wilson shrugged. Not our problem. After Wilson left, John sent Miguel with wagons of water and food to the camp. Find survivors. Bring them back if they need help. Miguel returned at dusk, the wagons still full. Nothing but ashes and absence, Patron. They're gone. Scattered to the wind like seeds. That evening, John sat on his porch again. The sun was setting, that same copper light painting the world. He barely touched his meal, thinking of the girl with her proud eyes and careful hands. Was she out there in the desert? Had she been in the camp when it burned? The bread sat beside him, untouched, waiting. Then he saw it, a line of shadows stretching across the plain. The army of the forgotten. At first, John thought it was a trick of the dying light. Desert mirages were common at sunset, when the heat of the day battled the coming cool of night. But the shadows moved, grew closer, and resolved into shapes. Women, dozens of them, then hundreds. They came in silence, a river of humanity flowing across his land. Their feet raised a cloud of dust that glowed gold in the sunset, making them seem like spirits emerging from the earth itself. Old women leaning on younger ones, their faces mapped with years of sun and struggle. Mothers carrying infants wrapped in shawls, the babies quiet as if they understood the gravity of this moment. Girls who should have been playing with dolls instead walked with the measured steps of those who'd already learned that childhood was a luxury they couldn't afford. And at their head, the girl. She was cleaner now, wearing a different dress, faded yellow, borrowed or shared. But John recognized those eyes immediately. Dark as deep wells, holding that same mixture of pride and need. The women stopped at the gate. For 100 souls, Miguel would count later. For 100 women who'd lost everything in the fire, standing silent in the dying light. Some carried bundles, all they'd saved from the flames. Others had nothing but the clothes on their backs. Behind the girl stood a woman who might have been her mother or sister, the same eyes, the same proud chin. She held a baby, maybe 6 months old, who stared at the world with solemn curiosity. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind whispering through the mesquite and the distant cry of a hawk. Then one woman stepped forward. Middle-aged, with silver threading through her black hair and a straight spine despite everything. Her dress had once been fine. John could see the quality in the fabric, though it was now patched and mended. When she spoke, her English was careful but clear, accented with the music of Spanish. Senor Mallory. She inclined her head slightly. I am Esperanza Morales. I speak for these women because I have the English and because they have chosen me. She paused, gathering her words like a general preparing for battle. The child told us what you did. Maria here, she gestured to the girl, and John finally had a name for those fierce eyes. She told us of your kindness. One small act when you owed nothing. When you could have had her driven away like a dog. Esperanza's voice grew stronger. We are the forgotten ones. Our men are gone, some to the railroad camps, some to the mines, some to God. We had little, and now we have less. The fire took our shelters, our few possessions. The townspeople. Her voice hardened. They will not help. To them, we are not people. We are problems. She gestured to the women behind her. But we are not beggars, senor. We have strong backs and willing hands. We know work, a hard work. We can cook, clean, sew, tend gardens, and care for animals. Some of us know healing herbs. Some can read and write and do numbers. We know how to make much from little, how to survive where others would die. For 100 pairs of eyes fixed on John. In the sunset light, they seemed to glow with desperate hope. You fed the forgotten, Esperanza continued. Now we stand for you. Give us work, and we'll give you loyalty. Give us shelter, and we'll give you our strength. We ask no charity, only a chance. A chance to earn our bread, to shelter our children, to live with dignity. She stopped, waiting. The silence stretched like a held breath. John looked at them, this army of the dispossessed, offering the only currency they had left, themselves. He thought of his empty house with its 20 rooms and 2 occupants. His vast lands could swallow a small city. His lonely dinners. He thought of Margaret, how she'd always said his wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used for something greater than himself. Money is just paper and metal, John, she'd told him on her deathbed. But kindness, that's the only currency that matters in the end. Miguel, he called, not taking his eyes off Esperanza. Open the gates. All of them. And tell the kitchen we'll need more bread. Much more. Miguel started to protest. Patron, for 100 women? Where will they stay? What will people say? The other ranchers can go to hell. John's voice was quiet but firm. Open the gates. Building a new world, what followed was not what the county expected. The first night was chaos. 400 women and children were camping in the courtyard, sharing the little food the kitchen could quickly prepare. John opened his storehouses, beans, flour, and salted meat. The women organized themselves with military efficiency, Esperanza directing the creation of cooking fires, the distribution of food, and the arrangement of sleeping areas. John barely slept, moving among them with Miguel and the house staff, trying to address immediate needs. A woman with a sick infant. Children with infected cuts from their flight through the desert. Old women exhausted from the journey. We need the doctor, John told Miguel. Doc Morrison won't come. Not for them. Then we go to San Antonio. Find a doctor who will. By dawn, the women were already at work. Without being asked, they'd begun cleaning the courtyard, organizing supplies, and tending to each other's wounds. Maria appeared at John's elbow as he surveyed the scene, silently handing him a cup of coffee someone had managed to brew. Gracias, he said. She smiled, the first time he'd seen her smile, and disappeared back into the crowd. Within days, the women had transformed the ranch. They brought with them skills John's money couldn't have bought, knowledge of desert plants that could heal wounds and cure fevers, techniques for preserving food in the heat without ice, and songs that made the hardest work bearable. They built their own small houses from adobe, turning the southern corner of John's land into a village. The work was hard, mixing mud and straw, shaping bricks, and drying them in the sun. But the women sang as they worked, and slowly, homes rose from the earth. They're building without permission, Wilson the banker observed on one of his visits. On your land. You know what this looks like, Mallory? Like progress, John replied. The older woman opened a school for the children in one of John's unused barns. Esperanza, who'd been a teacher in Mexico before the Troubles, led the efforts. Education is the only inheritance that cannot be stolen, she told John. The younger women worked the gardens, expanding John's small vegetable patch into acres of cultivation. They knew secrets of the desert, which cacti held water, which plants repelled insects, and how to make the alkaline soil bloom. They worked in the kitchens, turning simple ingredients into feasts. They mended and made and grew, their hands turning John's wealth into something more than numbers in a bank. Rosa, a widow with gentle hands, organized a clinic. She learned healing from her grandmother, she explained, and though she wasn't a doctor, she knew herbs and poultices and how to set bones and birth babies. John ordered medical supplies from San Antonio, proper bandages and medicines to supplement her traditional knowledge. Carmen, barely 20 with twin boys clinging to her skirts, proved to have a genius for numbers. John found her one evening in the ranch office, teaching herself from his accounting books by lamplight. I'm sorry, senor, she'd stammered, starting to flee. No, stay. He'd pulled out another chair. Show me what you've learned. Within a month, she was helping manage the ranch's books, her quick mind catching errors that had slipped past John's previous bookkeeper. The richness of stories in the evenings. The women would gather in the courtyard they'd built, and the stories would begin. It started organically. Someone would sing a lullaby to quiet a fussy child, and others would join in. Then someone would tell a story, maybe a fairy tale for the children, maybe a memory of home. Soon it became a ritual. After the evening meal, as the stars emerged in the vast Texas sky, the community would gather. John would sit at the edge of these gatherings at first, unsure of his place. But Maria would always appear, silently tugging him closer to the fire, into the circle of warmth and voices. The stories were treasures. Tales of ancestors who'd walked impossible distances for freedom. Love songs from villages that no longer existed. Legends of clever girls who outwitted devils and brave women who saved their families. But also harder stories of loss, of borders crossed in darkness, of families torn apart by distance and death. Esperanza often translated for John, her voice soft in his ear as stories unfolded in Spanish and sometimes in indigenous languages he didn't recognize. My grandmother, one ancient woman named Luz, shared, she remembered when there was no border here. Just the river and the desert and the sky. People moved like water, flowing where they needed to go. Through these stories, John began to understand. These weren't just displaced persons, abstract victims of misfortune. Each woman carried histories, cultures, and knowledge accumulated over generations. They were libraries of human experience, and they'd chosen to share that wealth with him. One night, 3 months after their arrival, Esperanza approached him as the gathering was breaking up. "You look troubled, senor." John had received a letter that day. The other ranchers were organizing. His charity, they claimed, was disrupting the labor market. Mexicans were getting ideas above their station. There were threats, veiled but clear. "It's nothing," he said. "We know about the letter," Esperanza said quietly. "We have eyes and ears in town. We know what they say about you. About us. I won't let them, we know." She placed a weathered hand on his arm. "But you should know something too. These women, they've survived worse than angry ranchers. We've crossed deserts, buried children, and faced down soldiers, bandits, and hunger. We don't scare easily." She smiled. "Besides, we have something they don't." "What's that?" "Each other. And now, you." The test came 6 months after the women's arrival. John woke to the sound of horses. Many horses. He reached for the rifle beside his bed, then moved to the window. 20 men sat mounted outside his gate. He recognized most of them, neighboring ranchers, the banker Wilson, even Sheriff Campbell. They wore their best clothes, as if this were an official delegation. John dressed quickly and went out to meet them. Miguel stood on the porch, rifle in hand. But it wasn't Miguel that surprised John. The women were there too. They'd emerged from their adobe houses silently, forming a line between the riders and the ranch. 400 women, standing shoulder to shoulder. Some held tools, hoes, hammers, and kitchen knives. Not threatening, exactly, but clear in their intent. Maria stood with her mother, those dark eyes fierce as ever. "Gentlemen," John said, walking past the line of women to face the riders. Early for a social call. Thompson, who owned the spread to the north, spoke for the group. "This has gone on long enough, Mallory. You're harboring illegals. Disrupting the natural order. It's bad for business, bad for Texas." "I'm employing workers," John replied calmly. "Last I checked, that was legal." "Don't play games," Wilson spat. "You know what this is about. Send them back where they came from, or you'll what?" Esperanza stepped forward. "Burn us out like you did the camp?" A ripple of unease went through the riders. Sheriff Campbell shifted in his saddle. Nobody proved that the fire was deliberate, and nobody tried very hard to prove otherwise. Esperanza shot back. "Enough," Thompson said. "Mallory, be reasonable. We're not asking you to throw them out immediately. Give them a month to make arrangements. We'll even provide wagons to take them to the border." "No." The word hung in the air like a challenge. "Then you're making a mistake," Wilson said. "We control the banks, the merchants, and the law in this county. We can make things very difficult for you." John smiled coldly. "You can try." Behind him, one of the women began to sing. Softly at first, then others joined in. It was a working song, one John had heard in the fields. The melody was simple but defiant, and soon all 400 voices were raised in unison. The horses grew nervous, dancing and snorting. The riders had to work to control them. "This isn't over," Thompson warned, but he was already turning his horse. The delegation rode away, dust and defeat in their wake. As the women dispersed, chattering excitedly in Spanish, Maria approached John. She'd grown in 6 months, he noticed. Still thin, but no longer gaunt. She held out her hand, and in it was a small object. A river stone, smooth and dark, with a vein of quartz running through it like lightning. "For strength," she said in careful English. "Like you gave us." Chapter 7. The transformation. The threatened difficulties came, but they were weatherable storms. The bank tried to call in loans, but John had accounts in San Antonio and Dallas, beyond the reach of local pressure. Merchants refused to sell to the ranch, but the women organized supply runs to distant towns, turning necessity into adventure. Some cowboys quit, unwilling to work alongside Mexicans. But others came, men who'd heard of Mallory Ranch as a place where hard work was valued regardless of who did it. Miguel's nephew brought 5 vaqueros from Mexico, skilled horsemen who could work cattle like artists. The ranch prospered as never before. The school grew. Esperanza convinced John to hire a proper teacher from San Antonio, a young woman named Catherine who'd scandalized her family by wanting to teach Mexican children. Together, they created something special. Children who'd never held a book were soon reading in 2 languages. Rosa's clinic became a beacon. When Doc Morrison's treatments failed, even white families would quietly make their way to the adobe building where Rosa worked her herb-scented magic. The evening gatherings evolved too. Sometimes John would find himself telling his own stories about building the ranch, about Margaret, about the loneliness that wealth couldn't cure. The women listened with the same attention they gave their own storytellers, and gradually, the line between employer and employed, between helper and helped, began to blur. One evening, a year after the women's arrival, John found himself in the middle of a heated debate about the best way to preserve meat in the desert heat. He was arguing passionately for smoking when Esperanza touched his arm. "Listen to yourself," she said, smiling. "You sound like one of us." He realized she was right. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being the rich rancher dispensing charity and become part of something larger. A community. A family. "Is that so bad?" he asked. "No, senor. It's perfect." Full circle 5 years passed. The adobe village was now a permanent part of Mallory Ranch, with neat streets and flowering gardens. Children who'd arrived hollow-eyed and scared now ran laughing through the courtyards, speaking English and Spanish with equal fluency. Many of the women had married, some to cowboys from the ranch, others to men from town who'd overcome their prejudice to court these strong, capable women. But married or not, they remained part of the community they built. Maria had grown into a young woman of 14, brilliant and fierce as ever. She spent her mornings in the school and her afternoons in John's office, learning the business of running a ranch. She had plans, she told him, to study law in San Antonio, to fight for people like her mother, like the women who'd walked out of the desert with nothing but hope. John was reviewing contracts with her one evening when Miguel burst in. "Riders coming. Lots of them." John's hand went to his gun, remembering that morning 5 years ago. But Miguel was smiling. "You'll want to see this, Patron." Outside, the setting sun painted the world in familiar shades of copper and gold. A line of people approached, but not mounted riders. These were walkers, families, men and women, and children, approaching the ranch with tentative hope. At their head was a man John recognized, Joaquin Morales, Esperanza's husband, finally returned from 5 years laboring on the railroad. Behind him were other men, other families, drawn by letters that spoke of a place where Mexicans were treated with dignity, where work was fairly paid, and where children learned to read. But that wasn't what made John's throat tight. It was the girl. She couldn't have been more than 8, thin and dust-covered, standing at the gate exactly where Maria had stood 5 years before. Her eyes fixed on the bread at the communal table where the evening meal was being served. Maria noticed her too. Without hesitation, she walked to the table, took a fresh loaf, and approached the girl. Knelt down, just as John had done. Extended the bread with that same wordless understanding. The girl took it, nodded once, and ran back to her family. Maria returned to John's side. "Now I understand," she said softly. "Why you helped me that day. Why? Because once you see, really see, you can't look away." She watched the new families entering the gates, being welcomed by the women who'd once stood in their place. And once you help, you understand that you're not giving. You're receiving. The richest man in Texas, John Mallory, died on a summer evening 15 years after a barefoot girl appeared at his gate. He was 75, and he died as he'd lived his last 20 years, surrounded by voices and laughter and the warmth of community. They buried him in the small cemetery the community had built, under a mesquite tree that threw dappled shade on the stone. The inscription, chosen by Maria, now a lawyer working to protect immigrant families, was simple. He shared his bread. At the funeral, over 1,000 people came to pay respects, not just from the ranch, but from across Texas and beyond. People whose lives had been touched by the community that grew from one act of kindness. Wilson the banker was there, older and perhaps wiser. The world had changed around him, and Mallory Ranch had led that change. Where once he'd seen threats, successful businesses now thrived, run by the children of those refugee women. As the sun set, painting the sky in the eternal colors of the Texas dusk, Esperanza spoke. "They say John Mallory was the richest man in 3 counties. They were wrong. He was the richest man in all of Texas, maybe in all the world. Not because of his cattle or his land or his gold, but because he learned the secret, that wealth shared multiplies, that kindness creates kingdoms, that the only fortune worth having is the one you give away." Maria stood with her own daughter, teaching her the stories as they'd been taught to her. The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. And somewhere in the desert, perhaps, another hungry child was walking toward another chance at kindness, carrying the future in their empty hands. The bread, they say, is still warm. The end,